Tonight's topic is sex for Gnostics. Our guest tonight is Monsignor Jordan Stratford. He's a priest of the Apostolic Johannite Church. He's the author of Living Gnosticism and also a dictionary of Western alchemy. His pastoral work has included the advocacy for the homeless and the mentally ill, and is a psychology first aid volunteer in his community. Welcome, Monsignor.
Welcome, Chris. Great to be here.
Well, let's jump right into the topic. What do you say, Bishop Laney?
I think it's an excellent idea.
Excellent. Well, the whole idea of sex for Gnostics is very specific rather than the general. And I want to talk more about the role of sexuality in Gnosticism and how it's understood both in terms of contemporary Gnosticism vis-a-vis classical Gnosticism. And I think we really need to start with the stone in the water of this particular issue. Really comes from Dr. Pagel's work, Gnostic Gospels in 1979. Mm-hmm. Her portrayal of Gnosticism, which she has certainly revisited and reframed, but in that work, she presents a very pro-sex, pro-women view of the Gnostic worldview, mm-hmm. and certainly of Gnostic scriptures. And that's not necessarily a generalization one should take away, but there are certain elements that we can look within the primary source material that do move the Gnostic framing of sexuality and body theology to something that we would see as more pro-women and more body positive than its counterparts in either Hellenized paganism of the first century or early Christianity. And so I think it's important to go and say, Gnosticism was not feminist. It was not 21st century sexuality and sexual mores. Your average garden variety Gnostic is their morality, their idea of their approach to sex, their taboos of sex would not be dissimilar from their non-Gnostic neighbors, be they pagan or Christian or Jewish. So for the most part, Bronze Age sexuality is Bronze Age sexuality. Their idea of certainly promiscuity, abortion, contraception, homosexuality. These are going to be pretty much the same in larger cultural milieu, and we don't have distinct Gnostic societies to point and say these people had a culture that was remarkably distinct. So that's really the first thing. Mm-hmm. But usually the argument gets framed in such a way that we're either saying that Gnostic sexuality is 21st century sexuality, that it's a feminist rooted sexuality, mm-hmm. which is to say that women have the same value and women have sexual agency. And that's really the only way that I think we can use that term in this context, in the ticking clock that we have remaining. Yeah. But so one is to argue that it was then as it is now, and the other is to look at the whole world-hating dualist trope that says that the Gnostics were afraid of sexuality, that it was living with the prison of the body, that you have to avoid sex because sex leads to babies, and babies are imprisonment of the soul. And we simply do not see that argument being made in the primary source texts. It doesn't show up. We see it in Mandaeanism. We see it in Manichaeanism. We see it in the Marcionites. But in any community that really talks about Gnosis as a central tenet, mm-hmm. that idea of rejecting the world, rejecting sexuality does not show up. It's not there in the Gospel of Philip. It's not there in the Apocryphon of John. It's not there in Thunder Perfect Mind. What we see instead is two really interesting things. One is we see an antinomianism, which is a rejection of cultural dictates regarding body ownership, and we see a sophiology where the divine feminine is made much more concrete than she is even in the first century, second century Judaism, where Sophia is much more of a kind of a concretized femaleness than than something that's more ambient than just using feminine nouns, like urglach, for example, which are just mangled because I'm thirsty. But my hearing was not so good when I talk a lot. So it's interesting to look at the secondary sources and the heresiologists who are kind of driving this debate and driving these issues. What I'm kind of doing here is I'm just doing a big info dump, and we can kind of take it apart. But these are just the things that I was thinking today in terms of that. And one is, we have Clement of Alexandria. I made a little note about what he said, which is marvelous. So Clement's talking about the Carpocratians.
Okay.
And he says that we wander into a boundless abyss of the carnal and bodily sins and embrace blasphemous and carnal doctrines, which, is really interesting for world-hating dualists to, in his words, overturn the lamps and so remove the light that they would uncover the shame of their dissolute righteousness and unite with whom they will. So not sure what all these body haters are doing at an orgy. Irenaeus says that we're practicing magic arts and incantations, love potions, and love feasts.
All right.
But somehow this is a bad thing, the way that he's putting it. So we have this really interesting criticism that was actually also used by the Roman status quo against early Christians, and the fact that these people are having too much sex and they're having orgiastic principles.
Yep.
So this is this obviously doesn't hold a whole lot of water. And on the other hand, we're supposed to be world-hating dualists who aren't having any sex. So obviously the reality is somewhere in the middle, and we can only look at our own material, at our own scriptural horizon to extract what was going on then. And then I think that the more interesting part for me and I think for all of us in the 21st century, certainly pastorally, is what can we do with this stuff so that we can inform the sexuality and the sexual experiences of people who are coming to us in terms of in places of crisis or in places of joy, and let them connect with that in a meaningful way that is also part of the Gnostic tradition. And we've got some lovely stuff that does that. Valentinus uses the metaphors of midwifery as how it relates to Gnosis, this idea of bringing forth and the babe rushing forth from the womb, and the sense of enlightenment as being born. And it's very earthy, and it's very sensual, and it's very primal. And I mentioned Thunder Perfect Mind, which is probably a pre-Christian Isis doxophony that became a sort of Sophianic incantation, if you will, and it's gorgeous. I mean, it's incredibly arousing, and it was used a few years ago. But it was Ridley Scott in a Prada commercial, a 3-minute short film, which is also just a beautiful, very moving piece of art. It's based from this marvelous, and yet titleless prose poem, Thunder Perfect Mind. And we have the Gospel of Philip, which I think resolves the whole thing. Philip gives us an out by saying, you don't worry about it. I mean, the actual line is at the end of Philip, do not fear the essence of the flesh, nor love it. If thou fear it, it will become thy master. If thou love it, it will devour thee and strangle thee. So, don't make it such a huge deal. Don't make it the centerpiece of your identity. Don't make it the centerpiece of your taboo. And I think that for a lot of the people who come to Gnostic community, they are liturgically wounded in some way. That their spiritual background has placed their sexuality, their sexual identity, their gender identity in some kind of no-go box.
Sure.
And I think that you can probably extrapolate that, because in orthodoxy, you don't exist until you get a body. So you don't get a soul until you get a body. These two things happen in conception; they happen at the same time. And whereas in Gnosticism, our body theology, and I argue that there is a consistent body theology throughout primary source Gnostic textual literature, that we pre-exist the body. That who you are is eternal, is co-created with the pleroma. Valentina says there's nothing whatsoever outside the pleroma. Philip says, whoever you are, you always have been and always will be. So you are older than your body. You're not your body, you're not your gender, and you're not your sexuality. It's not definitive. So there's something that you're experiencing that can open up opportunities for Gnosis. Valentinus is quite clear on this in Flora. So that we're here to experience the physical as a way of connecting and learning, and in many ways celebrating the mystery of the pleroma, of the fullness. But we don't end there. That's not.
We don't.
So we don't need to be afraid of it or shun it or run away from it or drill little lines around it or identify it with it too closely. It's just one petal on the flower.
Yeah, one aspect of who we are and one aspect of our incarnation. And if you center on it too much, you can get unbalanced, it would seem to me. Now, I'm interested, we've talked about, what probably was not going on with the early Gnostics. We have this, what material we have on that. We have a whole lot of accusations. And as we've discussed, those accusations tend to get thrown around a lot, so we can't really put too much stock in them. But now we come into 21st century modern Gnostics. We have people in our care who you've pointed out have been liturgically and theologically wounded in many, many ways. And so what can we say about an appropriate expression of Gnostic sexuality? And I would argue that given that we emphasize a direct experience and connection with the divine, this is something that we need to integrate into our own spiritual practice and spiritual lives. And when I'm not simply talking about the physical acts of sexuality, but also the way we think about it. Does it take over our mind? Are we perpetually looking for a new partner? These are the sorts of things that can really get us off track, but rightly used can get us onto a very positive track in our ongoing path of connection with the divine and developing Gnosis.
Yeah, I think just by going back to our hallmark, which is know thyself. That we can work with anyone that's come from a tradition wherein their own wiring or their own plumbing, whether it's physical or psychological or issues of identification, they've somehow been devalued in different traditions. That we can say, you're the only person that has ever had your body. Your sexuality is unique to you. If you want to identify with a specific community or a specific label, then go for it. But what really it matters is that this is your experience, and it needs to be engaged with in a way that is respectful and loving and healthy. Yeah. And so it's not a race to get somebody into some kind of constraint or label, and it becomes much more of an individual pastoral relationship. We're not in the social engineering business. No. So it doesn't really matter what we think about anything that is ever going to appear on any kind of form from the Bureau of Statistics. It's just about a one-to-one. Who is this person who's immediately with us? What is their Gnosis, and how can we create a space in a community for Gnosis to nest in their heart and take root? Yeah,
and the other thing, though, I'm not so much pushing back here, but something that does occur to me is that yes, we may be older than this body, but we can do a lot of damage with this body, and Absolutely. So a reckless approach to sexuality in any context, but in particularly if you're going to try and baptize bad behavior by saying, well, I'm a Gnostic and this is my path. Well, yes, that could be true, but you can also catch very nasty diseases and create unwanted children and have family courts picking your pocket every month for child support and, right. Creating havoc within a community and hurting people's feelings. So, I think this is something that requires our attention, not our total focus, but it is absolutely something that requires our attention, particularly when we have people coming into this community who may be coming here because they were rejected in other spiritual communities because of their sexuality or their gender-related issues.
Yeah, and in which case it comes down to individual respect and
Yep.
letting people, when people understand their power is ability, power is ability, then they begin to understand and respect the impact that they have on others and on their environment. And so when I'm talking about sexual empowerment, I'm not saying that it's sexual license to just go and rub anything together that feels good. It's just not about neurological it's not just about neural stimulation. This is about connection, and that connection has to be coming from a place that is healthful and respectful. And so I think that I really welcome dialogue from people from communities where their sense of sexuality is outside the mainstream, but which it's certainly not a requirement. You don't have to come from any kind of fringe community or identify with fringe community to have a Gnostic sexuality. A Gnostic sexuality is just, as I said, it's just one petal on the flower that we are. It's one aspect of ourselves that we can use creatively and beautifully to honor and unfold the Gnosis that's within ourselves and to inspire the Gnosis that's within others.
Yes. I really like what you say about recognizing the power in ourselves. It's part of the whole process of knowing ourselves, beginning with know thyself, and then maybe we can move forward with a little bit more grace and use that power correctly.
Yeah, and that's the tricky part. I mean, Gnosis is relatively easy. The grace is the hard part, and that's so we all of us who identify as Gnostics have had this glimmer. The epiphany happens by accident. The Gnosis, where it's actually transformative, we have glimpses of that. We're trying to create a culture, and in the context of this conversation, trying to create a sexuality that nourishes that gives a safe space for that to take root. And the fruit of Gnosis is grace. That's take a long time. I can honestly attest to my own experiences of Gnosis. Grace seems a long way off, and that's the hard part.
It doesn't cost anything once you have it. I find it's like compassion. It doesn't cost anything once you have it, but it's getting there. That you spend a lot on your way up there. So unfortunately, we are going to have to wind down the conversation, but we do have a bit of news this week, a couple of things that are happening in the Chicago area. I will be at this event actually on Friday night. John Michael Greer, the very well-known esoteric writer who's also written on peak oil, is going to be discussing the history of geomancy at the Occult Bookstore this Friday night. And I'm going to be there. It's going to be a really great presentation, and I, would absolutely recommend that if you can make it, please do so. And it's going to be starting at 8 p.m. It is free, and if you want more information, you can call the bookstore at 773-292-0995. There is also going to be a workshop on geomancy going on over the weekend. The cost of that, I want to say, is around $200. If you're interested, call the bookstore and see if they have any more space. Also, I will be coming on staff as a reader at the Occult Bookstore. I'm doing geomantic readings on a regular basis. So if anybody is interested in booking a reading with me, I can do them in person, online, and by phone. And again, you can contact the store at 773-292-0995 to schedule an appointment.
Fantastic. Well, again, I want to thank, Monsignor Jordan for being on the show. Interesting conversation. I mean, I don't think I put too much into it simply because I'm listening to the Monsignor, really give I think a really good kind of concise view on the subject. And I really appreciate, your input on this, because I think for many within our community, it's a very touchy subject.
Yeah.
And, I think sometimes as clergy, we're being asked for specific answers regarding sexuality. And I think, Jordan, you did a really good job, and I think really explaining, really where it really needs to be. So we really appreciate it. Where can people find you on the internet if they want to hook up with you, Jordan?
JordanStratford.com. That's really the easiest way, or through the AGC website, which is Johannite.org.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, again, we appreciate all of the feedback we get from our viewers. We've been having some great dialogues on both Facebook, on Google Plus, as well as here on YouTube. You can always, contact us at talkgnosis@gnosticnyc.com. If you want to give us any commentary, any suggestions for upcoming shows, we would deeply appreciate it. Anything we got coming up on the next show on our agenda?
Got some ideas, Bishop Ken, but it'll be a surprise, I think.
Okay, awesome.
All right, and as always, this has been a production of the Gnostic NYC Network. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with your friends, click the like button, and subscribe to our channel. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the views of Gnostic NYC or any other organizations. No animals were harmed during the production of the show. And for more Talk Gnosis, tune in every Wednesday for new episodes. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.